All right, hey everybody. We're going to be doing a couple of examples where we'll be adding integers, adding positive and negative integers together. You've been doing some practice with this, and we've suggested that you take a look at a number line or use a number line and count. But today we're going to be doing examples where we're specifically using number lines to show our work and to find our answers. So, before we get started doing some problems, I just want to make some notes for myself to help me remember which way to move on a number line and which way my arrow should be facing. So, up here, I wrote some notes where it says adding a positive. So, what's important for me to remember as I'm solving these and as I'm drawing them out in a number line, as I'm modeling them, is that when I'm adding a positive, I have to remember that I'm moving right. So, I'm going to say move to the right. My arrow is going to be going this way. And it's going to be, however long it is, the length of it is going to be the number that I'm adding. So if I'm adding a positive 1, my arrow is going to be 1 space long. When I'm adding a negative, I'm going to remind myself that I have to move to the left. My arrow is going to be facing this way, and just like above, the length is going to be determined by what negative number I'm adding. If I'm adding a negative 5, my arrow is going to be 5 spaces long. So I'm going to start out by looking at this first one here, 5 plus negative 10. You might know this off the top of your head without using a number line, but we're really going to be focusing on modeling right now. So we're really going to be almost requiring you to use a number line and represent the expression, the problem, using a number line. So what's important to start with is that you're always going to be starting at 0. Which your first arrow, the direction and the length, is depending on how long and if this first number is positive or negative. So what I'm going to look at first is this first number here is 5, not negative. There's no sign before the 5, which tells me that it's a positive 5. So the first thing I'm going to do is at my starting point, 0. From here, I'm going to draw an arrow to positive 5. And to help myself remember, I'm going to just make a little note that that is 5 long, because sometimes some of these arrows I'm going to draw they're going to be overlapping, and I just want to make sure I keep all of my numbers, keep track of them. So now when I look at the problem, I drew my arrow to 5. Now I'm adding a negative 10. I have to look, if I'm adding a negative, I'm moving to the left, and my arrow is going to be 10 spaces long because I'm adding a negative 10. So when you draw your second arrow, you always start where you ended. So my arrow is going to start at 5, and I'm going to draw an arrow to the left. That's 10 spaces long. So starting at negative 5, I'm going to draw an arrow. This is 5 spaces long. I'm going to do 5 more. It's a little bit long, to negative 5. You can kind of double check. You can count each individual space underneath, make sure that it's 10 long. What I just did here was I said, well, if I know this is 5 long, I know that this is 5, and then to make it a whole 10, I just need to go another 5 spaces. And again, I'm going to label this as negative 10. Once you do that, the hard work is over. Now you're just looking and saying, well, where did my arrow end up? It ended at negative 5. So that means my answer is negative 5. For the next one here, really similar. We have negative 6 plus 10, negative 6 plus positive 10. Again, I'm going to be starting at 0. Always your starting point is 0. And then you're looking at your first number and you're going to say, well, my first number is negative 6, which means I need to draw my first arrow starting at 0. I need to draw my first arrow to negative 6, which is right here. to the left to -6. Again, I'm going to label my arrow with -6 just so I can keep track. Once you do that, you're then looking at, you're adding a +10, which again, if I look up at my notes, adding a positive, I'm moving to the right. And it's going to be 10 spaces long. The length is going to be 10. Now I'm starting where I ended. I'm starting at -6 here. And again, I'm drawing an arrow to the right because I'm adding a +10. I'm drawing an arrow to the right. That's 10 spaces long. So if I start at -6, my arrow is just 6. And to make it a full 10, I'm going to draw my arrow 4 more spaces. Try to make it. And again, you can double check and you can count that this is 10 spaces long. Or like I said before, I drew it over my arrow, that's 6, and then I needed to go 4 more to make it a whole 10. And then I'm going to label it +10. And again, the hard part is over. Now you're just looking, where does this end up? At a +4. So your arrows, or sorry, not your arrow, your sum, the answer to this addition problem is going to be +4. Now, we're going to look at this last one here. I'm going to do the first step and then I'm going to pause. And I want you to pause this video and try to do it on your own. Either draw it on your own, use your finger on your computer and try to solve it on your own. But what we want to do first, what does my addition problem say? -3 plus -7. Remember, these parentheses and these parentheses don't mean absolute value. They just are a way to separate the addition sign from this negative sign. From this addition sign to this negative sign, this 10 doesn't have any because it's just 10. There's no negative sign to get confused with your signs. So I'm going to start out like we always do. We're starting out at 0. My first number is in -3. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw my arrow to the left all the way to -3. And I'm going to write that out. Now, I'm going to try to get as much of this as I can. I'm going to stop talking. I'll pause this video and try it on your own. Okay. Hopefully that was enough time to try it on your own. Now you can check your answer. So I did my first step. I drew my arrow to my first number. I drew it to -3 because that's my number here. I'm now adding a negative, adding a -7. And again, if I look back up at my notes, adding a negative, my arrow is going to the left. This one's a little bit different because I'm going to have to count here because I'm starting where I ended. I'm still starting at -3 because that's where this arrow ended. My new arrow has to start here, and I'm moving to the left, -7. So let's see. I'm going to count, and I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Like this. Notice this is the only problem on this page where both arrows are blue. Both arrows are going the same direction. Up here, my -10 and my +5 crossed over each other. 10 and -6 crossed over each other. But -3 and -7, notice they're both going to the left because both of these numbers are negative. If you owe someone $3 and then you owe them $7 more, you're getting more and more negative. If it's -3 degrees and it's getting colder, it's getting 7 degrees colder, your answer is going to get more and more negative. So here, again, the hard part's over. You drew your arrows. Now, wherever you ended, that's going to be your answer. If you have any other questions, just email me.